Welcome to the Epic booth, everyone. My name's Daryl Aubert, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a sneak peek of some of the things we've been working for Unreal Engine 5.4. Many of the things I'm going to be showing you today are experimental. Some of the things I'm going to be showing you were previously experimental in 5.3, and they've moved into beta. I'll make sure to identify those throughout the presentation. We're going to be talking about several topics today. We're going to talk about rendering a bit. We're going to cover animation. We're really serious about animation inside of the engine. We've been animating everything in Lego Fortnite using the editor. It's an awesome set of tools that we've been developing for that, and we're going to share some of that with you today as far as setup goes. I'll finish up with a little bit of PCG and a tiny mention of some of the things we've been doing that are interesting with audio. I'm going to be going pretty quick. I have a lot to cover. If you guys want to see a more in-depth demo or presentation afterwards, feel free to come over to the demo pods or the kiosks. We'd be happy to dive into these features and show them to you in a bit more in depth. So with all that said, let's hop over to the editor and get started. So the first thing we want to talk about are improvements that we've made to rendering. Now, we've been working on the rendering engine since UE5 with some really amazing technology. So things like Lumen and Nanite are being used in this scene, and those tools continue to improve. We've made significant improvements algorithmically and with parallelization to those technologies so that 5.4 has got a really nice speed improvement. If you take something in 5.0, like maybe the city sample scene, and load it on the exact same piece of same hardware and run it in 5.4, it's going to be about 2x faster. We've had really great speed improvements, which ultimately leads to quality improvements in addition, right? Like, because you can start turning up the quality sliders once you start to get those speed improvements. So really happy with where we're getting, and that's going to continue to evolve. We're going to get more and more parallelization into the engine, specifically as we move forward. So what we want to do is look at some of the enhancements that we've made to Nanite. So Nanite progressively has been adding more and more functionality into it. And with 5.4, we've done a lot of work to the tessellator. So we have Nanite tessellation that gives us the ability to do some really interesting workflows, specifically in the context of a game. So let's go ahead and jump over here really quickly and kind of move down onto this ground. So I'm using the landscape system inside of Unreal to create this kind of snowy terrain. Right now I have some texture maps associated with it. These were Quixel assets that I got off of Bridge. And so they come with normal maps and displacement maps. So right now, all we're seeing is that kind of wispy snow represented across that landscape with the help of a normal map. If we were to look at the triangles, you'll see that I actually have Nanite enabled. There we go. And across that terrain, Nanite's turned on. That's why we're seeing the colorful polygons. But there's not enough detail or tessellation in there to capture that displacement, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to actually enable Nanite tessellation, which is going to add another level of tessellation on top of that original landscape that will have enough polygons to capture that detail. And it's really easy to do inside of Unreal. All you have to go and do is grab your landscape and just kind of scroll down here and bring up that material. It's a little large. Let's just shrink that down. And we'll kind of scroll down to the bottom here and just scooch this over so you can see what's going on. I'm just going to turn on tessellation. As soon as we do that, now there's a lot of polygons, right? Tons and tons of detail in that landscape, and you can start to see the subtle little contours of some of those areas that previously were just normal map representations. And if I overdrive the value of the snow, it's just a multiplier on that displacement channel that's kind of going into that guy. You can start to see, okay, yeah, that's all displaced geometry now. You can start to really see that. And if we jump back to a lit mode, it's going to just add that really nice subtle detail scattered across that terrain. So great new functionality inside of Unreal with the ability to overdrive that material. Now this is a slightly different example, but it's kind of the same idea. I've got some geometry on these tents that's very low polygon count, right? And on top of that, I've got a little animated normal map. I'm just moving the texture map across that to represent wind. What we want to do is we want to get actual displaced geometry. So the same idea that we saw with the landscape. I'm going to go ahead and grab this material and close this one down and just double click on this guy. And let's just shrink it down here and kind of scroll down to the bottom. And as soon as I enable that tessellation, just like that, you can now see that we have these nice tents blowing in the wind, and it does a great job also in the virtual shadow maps, right? So all that stuff just starts to work together. This allows me to create very lightweight, from a disk perspective, I can store very lightweight geometry and then use that nanolite tessellation to add in all that subtle detail. And the fact that we can animate the tessellator is super cool and very powerful. And the way I'm doing this, just so you can get a sense of what's going on with that, it's actually really quite simple. Let's just jump in here and I'll bring up the graph for that guy really quick so you can kind of see what's going on. So I've got just my UV, I'm just doing a simple pan across the UV channels. It drives the displacement as well as a normal map. And then down here, I've got this little mask that I generated in Houdini. It's just a kind of a trace in to find the interior volumes, and I'm multiplying that back into the displacement map and the normal map to ultimately have those fixed points of the internal structure of the tent not get displaced and moved around in the wind. So another pretty classic example of the types of things you can do with Nanite, lightweight geometry and having texture map information add in all that subtle detail. Very, very powerful from a game workflow perspective. So the final thing that we're going to look at is kind of combining all those together. It's kind of some of the landscape stuff with some of the texturing stuff, and we're going to do that in the context of a character running around my environment. So I based this scene out of the third-person template. So as I start to run my character around here, you can see they're leaving these nice little footprints in the snow, and they're all displaced out. That's just basically sampling each foot, rendering that into a runtime virtual texture, taking that runtime virtual texture and multiplying that into the displacement channel of the original texture map that came from Quixel. So putting it all together, we end up with landscapes that's deformable. So, tire tracks, snow, mud, things like that you can do very, very efficiently and elegantly utilizing all these tools together. So a few other things that we've been working on in the renderer. Let's talk about localized volume fog. So I've got environmental fog in my scene. I've got some really nice volume effects sort of happening on my light here as I kind of look at the truck. It kind of has this pretty look, but those background mountains don't really have the amount of hazing that I want. I want more smoke in the valleys. Now I do have a little bit happening right here, and the way I'm getting that is using localized volume fog. It's a new feature in 5.4, and it gives you very art directable fog placement. So let's go ahead and check that out. What does it mean? Well, if I just search for local, and I grab this localized fog volume, and if I kind of hit my G key here, you can see there's that localized fog. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that localized fog and I'm just going to duplicate it. And then we'll just drag it across here and start adding in a little bit more fog mist at the base of those mountains. So really simple thing, but it makes a big impact in the ability for artists to get exactly the look and feel they want in their fog. It gives you another level of control or another layer to work with. Super powerful feature. So the next thing that we want to talk about really quickly is heterogeneous volume and some of the improvements we've made to the volume renderer in 5.4. So to do that, I'm actually going to use one of the samples that we shipped the engine with. This is a Niagara fluid sim. I'm just going to drag and drop that into my scene here. And let's kind of rise that guy up and spin it around. I'm going to set this little barrel on fire. Hey, I did a pretty good job of placing that. Look at that. I'm hired. Ultimate placer. So heterogeneous volumes. Previously, they looked cool, but they were limited. They didn't integrate exactly the way we wanted to into the deferred renderer. So we put a lot of work into that in 5.4. Now heterogeneous volumes can do a couple things. First of all, the direct illumination model has the ability to cast shadows into the environment. So if we go up here and we just turn on cast shadows, go to the details for that guy, you can see, all right, great, now we have shadows. That's a pretty fundamental thing. We didn't have that in 5.3, so I'm really glad that's there. The other thing that we've done is we've worked heavily on the look and feel of this. Now, if we look on the bright side here that's getting by the sun, you can see that it's illuminated nicely, but the back side isn't really getting any indirect light contributed to that. So I'm just going to use a C-bar to turn that on. This looks a little bit better than it used to in 5.3, so let's just drop down here and turn on heterogeneous volumes, indirect illumination. So now it's grayed out a little bit more. And the final thing that we've really put a lot of effort into is the compositing of this. So the ability for this to get integrated into the scene and ground into it and feel correct. Specifically with fog, right? It layers on top of that background fog really nicely. As I move this truck around, or my camera around, and you can see that kind of volume fog graying the truck out from the sunlight as we kind of get into that. It does the exact same thing for the smoke. And as I pass it behind these translucent surfaces, it again composites and stacks together exactly the way you'd want. This would not look nearly as good in 5.3. Just take my word for it. These are significant improvements to the look and feel of heterogeneous volumes in 5.4. So the next thing that we want to talk about is animation. As I previously said, we are super serious about making world-class animation tools directly inside of the editor. That is for setting up characters as well as actually positioning and animating characters as many of our artists need to do. So I'm going to spend a fair bit of time talking about setup. Now, previously in Unreal, we've had this thing called Control Rig. Insanely powerful rigging system inside of Unreal, node-based. Took a lot of work to really rig up a complex character. What we're trying to do with a lot of our tools in the editor is bring them the level of usability to an initial state that artists can work with them very fast and iteratively. And we approached rigging slightly different for 5.4 with a new workflow called modular rigging. This layers on top of the original control rig, but it brings it down to a more accessible level for artists to work with. So it's designed off the bat to work with characters. Like, it has a lot of logic in it specifically for working with characters. I'm going to actually be using it to rig this truck. And I'm going to walk you through the process of how you can take it and kind of break it apart and use some of the functionality inside of there to do some non-character-based things for it. Because I think cars are characters too, in my eyes. So let's go ahead and get this guy into the modular control rig workflow. We'll go back into a folder where that truck kind of lives. I'm going to create a new control rig. I'm going to tell it to be a modular control rig as my panel that I want to load up. And I'm just going to not even bother naming this stuff because I'm in a rush. So looks like a standard editor inside of Unreal. Let's just switch this view over here to tiles. And the first thing that it's doing is it's prompting me. It's saying, hey, what do you want to rig? Well, I want to rig this skeletal mesh down here kind of toward the bottom. I want to grab my proxy truck. Now, one of the really interesting things about modular control rig is when you're working on it, you can transfer the rig from one skeletal mesh to another skeletal mesh in a click of a button. It's super, super fast. So what this means is you can start the rigging process very early on in production, right? You can rig a proxy vehicle and all that work will propagate downstream into your final assets. I also like to use proxy geometry a lot of times when I'm rigging because it's just easier for me to look at, right? Like, I don't have to have that big complex truck with all the textures kind of distracting me. I want to look at a simplified version of my geometry and my bone structure to make it easier for me to rig this kind of stuff up. Now, the modular rigging workflow is kind of a wizard-based workflow, right? Like, when you bring it in here, you can see there's this thing called a socket. It's basically saying, hey, I've identified this bone off of the root bone. This is probably an area that your first area that you're going to want to interact with when you're animating this vehicle. So let's put a controller there. The controller that we're going to add to it is just a simple. It's called add controller. This is basically like a parent constraint inside of Maya. It's kind of the easiest way to think of it. It's going to grab it and grab the translation and rotation scaling. All that stuff's going to come along for the ride. So it's on there. You can't see it because it's a little small. I'm just going to increase the size of that. So what I've got now is I've got a controller that I can grab the top part of my truck with, right? And you saw when I added that controller onto that socket, it went out and said, hey, like, what other things might you want to work around with? Where might else you want another controller? It uses a little bit of logic to kind of decide where those sockets are going to be. And again, that logic is based on bipedal characters, right? You can make your own modules that have their own logic in them. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be manually adding sockets because I'm just going to be hijacking this thing called piston. Piston is a workhorse of a constraint system inside of modular control rig. It's basically two aim constraints pointing at each other. Two bones with an aim constraint both pointing at each other. And that's all you need to rig up this truck. It's a very, very powerful feature. And I'm going to slow down those tooltips so they don't pop up quite so often. So tooltips summons delay. Guys want to use that C-bar all the time, because then you don't get all those pop-ups. But then if you wait, 6 seconds, I will get the pop-ups. That's the pro hidden tip for the day. I should have done that before I started the presentation. Anyway, we want to move forward. We want to rig up these pistons. Actually, let's rig up the front wheels. Solid axles are kind of tough to rig in a traditional rigging system, right? I want to, as an animator, just grab a wheel and position it. I want the other wheel to kind of counterbalance itself and know what to do. That's actually really easy to do with a piston. So let's check out how that workflow would look. Let's just grab this bone, and I'm going to look at my rig hierarchy. You can see I got axle start. I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to say, you know what? I want a new socket right there. Give me a socket to put one of these modules on. I'm going to grab out that piston, drag it and drop it on there. Now, as soon as I do that, it's added it. You can see over here in my modular hierarchy, it's there. You can't see it in the viewport, and that's just because the controllers are a little bit small. So I'm going to make those big because I want to be able to grab them kind of near my tires. Now, I've got two controllers that just showed up, and they're gray. The reason they're gray is they haven't been added into the hierarchy of my character, my modular character here. It's not underneath the root. Notice that there's some color setting here in the module settings. As soon as I drag and drop that under the root, they know where they are. They know that they're on the right-hand side of the character, so they're color-coded, giving me that visual cue that they are now in the hierarchy. Like, I know they're there because they're not gray, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to just drag that other controller over to the other side of the vehicle, kind of position it where I want it to be, and just like that, I now have a control system that lets me grab, one tire or the other tire. Very, very fast, very easy. You could do this in Control Rig. Yeah, of course you could. You could do it in Maya, Blender, Houdini, wherever. It's really, really fast to do it here. An artist can do it in a matter of seconds here. And that's the real power of the Modular Control Rig. So to finish this guy up, I'm just going to add a couple of more constraints, more modules onto these shock absorbers. So we'll grab that one. We'll grab that one. I'm going to go back to the original rig hierarchy, and I'm going to say, you know what? I need sockets. These are things I want to interact with. I'm going to go ahead and just grab that piston, drag and drop it on top of there. And again, it's made it. You can't really see it because it's a little small, but I'll just increase the size of that, and we'll just drag and drop that again underneath the root. And just like that, we now have that module. So if I grab this guy and slide it down toward the end, that controller's in the right spot. So if I grab it and begin moving it, what's it going to do? It's actually going to take that bottom bone and aim at it, right? It's like I said, it's two bones aiming at each other. But here's the interesting thing. You don't have to populate all these fields. Like some of them need to be populated for the bare minimum for the module to work. It does that automatically. But if I want more functionality in this, I might have to map in a few other bones. So what happens if I translate this up and down? Well, because I haven't defined the end bone, it doesn't know to actually pull that end bone along for the ride. So how do you fix that? Well, all you have to do is map it in, right? So we can deselect this. We can go in here and grab, actually it's probably easier just to grab it here. Let's grab that guy, get ourselves sort of the end bone, and I'm just gonna come over here and I'm gonna say end bone, use that as the input. So now what we have is we've got a piston that goes up and down. We want this controller to be part of the hierarchy of the truck, so we're going to grab that bone, and we're going to parent the end bone into that. So we'll just go to parent bone end, hit the map button. So now I've got the ability to grab my truck, and we can kind of hide those guys and just grab this, and I move it up and down. It does what I would expect, right? Now, here's the cool thing. I'm just going to take this guy, and I'm going to mirror it across to the other side. So we'll say mirror. We're looking, I did the left side today, so we'll do _L. We're going to match over to _R. We'll hit OK. And in a matter of a second, we've got another rig. If I grab this, it just does what you want. Very, very fast. So let me fast forward here to a version that's a bit more complete. Let's just grab up this truck that's done. I think it's up here. Grab that dude. So lots of sockets, lots of controls added. And if we get kind of under the truck here, let's just turn off the display of those, and I start to move this around. You can see that everything works, everything does exactly what you'd expect. This top part's actually really interesting. That's two pistons pointing at each other. That'd be really hard to do actually in Maya, because it would be a kind of Maya's a dependency graph, right? So it would be like this non-destruct or this kind of self-feedback loop. But Control Rig, it just works. It's like magic. Really, really cool. And then of course I've got a little bit of control on the ability to grab this guy and spin my wheels and do the stuff. So that's basically it for Modular Control Rig. You can rig things very, very quickly with this tool. So the end result ends up being something that looks like this. Let's just drag and drop this other version of this truck into my level here. We'll place that guy right there. So animation tools inside of Unreal have also been getting better, a lot better. Lots of fit and finish and polish usability things have been added into the sequencer. So if I grab this truck, and we've got this, it automatically, the control rig comes in, you drop it into the scene, it automatically makes a sequence for us. We can get animating on top of that. So if I hit my S key on this cabin, it's gonna set a keyframe. So we can kind of set a key there, and maybe I'll set a key here. And if I move forward in time and I turn on auto key, which it looks like it's already on, I can begin using the new gizmos. So the new gizmos are really great. As an animator, I can just use my middle mouse button. I don't actually go in there and actually touch that. It's going to auto key for me. So as a poser, I can just hit my E key, middle mouse button to kind of move this guy around, hit the E key again, it goes to a free arc ball. So if you cycle through the E key, it locks to the camera plane, hit it again, it goes into an arc ball. So you can kind of just really quickly with your keys, jump around and not having to go in there and actually grab that stuff to set keyframes and animate this character. It's much, much faster. Another thing worth noting is in our NM details, if we were to bring up the graph editor, or the curve editor, you can use this NM details as a actual filter system to say, show me only that translation or that translation. So it's a really nice filtering system. All these little things have been going into the tools to make them more artist-friendly, faster for animators to work with. The final thing worth mentioning is in Sequencer, we've added in the ability to filter out certain things that you don't want to see. So there's a lot more control to customize what the look and feel of this is. So if I don't need to see like, or I want my navigation keys back on, I can just re-enable them. So hopefully that makes sense and it resonates with people who are trying to animate characters, and you kind of can see our vision and where we're going with these tools. So the final thing that I want to talk about really quickly is actually some more character stuff. Let's jump in and actually do some character stuff. So as I said before, we're trying to take a lot of the common tasks that you're doing often and accelerate them. You know, if we can figure out something that you're going to be doing 90% of the time, we want to make that like one mouse button to do it. Like modular rigging is accelerating the process of rigging characters. Retargeting characters is another area where we've been working in 5.4 to accelerate that process for a lot of the types of things you're going to want to do. So let's look at the new workflow for character retargeting. If I bring this, let's just jump over here to my collection. We'll go into demo. So I've got that third-person character that has some motion on it. I want to hijack that animation and put it onto my own custom snow character. I want to retarget animation onto this guy, right? So to do that, all I have to do is kind of go back here and go on to this, right-click and say retarget animations. So this is the retargeting window. It's actually had a good bit of work put into it in 5.4. You can resize it, first of all, that's new. And what it does is it lets you, in one click, retarget a character. You don't have to manually go into an IK retargeter and set it up and define the chains and things like that. It's going to look at the hierarchy of the skeleton. If it recognizes what skeleton it is, it's going to automatically set all that up for you, right? And it knows all of the epic skeletons as well as many of the third-party skeletons, Vicon skeletons, like Daz, like 30 or so skeletons. It actually knows the hierarchy and the structure of those because they're predefined. If it recognizes it, it works with a single click, which is pretty awesome. So we're going to just grab our retarget character. We'll just throw a little animation on there so you can see, just like that, it knew, you know, this character was my source, this character was my target, it recognizes it, it does it. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could now batch export all of those animations out. You can also export the retarget assets, which means if you wanted to do like a runtime retarget, you could do that really quickly. It's automatically set up for you. You just export them out and use it with the runtime retargeter. So insanely powerful tool. Now, previously I just loaded up the skeletal editor of that character. Now, the skeletal editor is also moved into beta. So we introduced this and we had some nice functionality in there previously in 5.3, but it wasn't fully featured. And we're starting to get there. We're going to keep adding more and more into this tool. The main thing that for me, the main improvement is when I'm in edit weights now, I can actually go into a bone mode, select a bone and rotate it and begin painting in context. We couldn't do that previously. So I can go in there, select the bone, start playing with the weightings. It's also worth noting that if you wanted to, you could go ahead, like if I wanted to, you know, paint some white over there or something like that. If you wanted to, you could actually load up an animation asset and see and preview the animation of the weighting work that you've done in the editor. You don't have to leave the editor. So again, it's these subtle little fit and finishes thing, but they make the things you do every day in the tool a lot easier, a lot faster, a lot less friction. That's really what we're driving for as we continue to work on Unreal Engine. The last thing that I'm going to mention about this tool, because it is worth mentioning, is you do something like a vertice select. Now, this character is not super dense, but that was really slow. There was a little bit of latency after you did selections on vertices and things like that. We've got a massive amount of speed improvements inside of the tool, and we've added, you know, one of the most requested features was the ability to grow and shrink vertice selections. So the idea is you could do some vertice selections, do some weighting, you know, shift where those vertices, the weighting of what bone they're assigned to, grow it back out, you know, grow your selection out, and then hit the average button to soften that fall off so it's not a hard fall off. So little subtle workflow things like that actually make it a very powerful tool now for doing character weighting of vertices to bones. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm going quickly, but it's a great feature. I really do love that feature. So the final thing that we want to talk about is motion matching. If you guys saw State of Unreal, hopefully you've seen it. If you haven't, go watch it. There's a demo in there called Jasper. That's our motion matching demo that we put together. And it's using a very large data set of clips for the motion matcher to work with. What I'm showing is like the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm showing motion matching with sparse data sets. And it still looks great. That's the point. It can work with very sparse data sets and still be really an amazing tool for handling character animation in runtime, you know? So let's check it out. Let's see it in context. Let's go ahead and jump over, switch our mode to my snow dude. We'll get rid of that. We don't need to see that. And we'll hit play. All right, so here we are. And as I run my little guy around, you can see I've got these nice arc animations happening as I run this guy. If I do some starts or some stops, really good transitions. And this is using, again, a very sparse data set. Let's go ahead and jump back and I'll show you the clips for this. It's using 12 clips. It's ridiculously good looking animation for this limited number of data sets. The ability for it to transition and match and select the right clip and do the warping and the blending and make it just all look great for 12 clips. Amazing. So, and here's a fun thing. Like if we pull up the database, you can see here's the initial database. This is it. It's just it's a few arcs, couple starts, couple stops. Not a lot in there. And it really is, even though it's a simple example, it's actually doing some very sophisticated things. We're using the root bone offset for the initial kind of local motion. And that's a new experimental plugin. Off of that root bone offset, where then the motion matcher, it kind of gives it the angle, and then the motion matcher selects the correct clip based off of that angle off the root bone offset, and then it does like a little bit of blending and warping and magic, and it just gives you these really nice animations. Now, a lot of times when you're dealing with animations and motion matching, you're going to want to, as the animators are fine-tuning those blends and things like that, there's going to be areas that they're going to want to investigate and maybe finesse or modify that animation. We have some great tools for helping facilitate that directly inside of the editor. So let's check that out. This is the Rewind Debugger. So if we type rewind, it's hard for me to spell, but I can do it sometimes. We get this tool, and in this tool, if we go ahead, it's already queued up. If I hit play, there's my character. I'm going to hit F8 to kind of jump back out and turn on the record button. We'll hit F8 to jump back in, and I'm just going to record some clips. So as I run my character around, you can see it's recording all this cool data. He's doing his thing. Let's do some arcing, kind of run and do something like that. Great. If I hit the pause button, I can now go back and scrub through this and see what's happening. Of course, I can decouple the camera. I could tell it to, follow based on a certain angle. Like if I want my character to only see the back of them, I can run around this guy and kind of, oops, I didn't click the right button. But anyway, the Rewind Debugger gives you the ability to inspect what's going on, see the blends, see the transitions, and if you need to make a change, it's just a mouse click away. If we double click on that clip, it's going to load up the animation editor specifically on that frame, and now as the animator, I can go in there and start to change or make modifications to that to improve the quality. So awesome, very, very powerful tool. The final thing that I'm going to talk about is audio. And actually PCG, because I have to mention the PCG stuff because it's super cool. Let's just play this. Let's stop this and we'll play it around here. Actually, we're gonna do PCG first and then we'll do audio. So if you look at my landscape, there's areas that are flattened around the bases. I'm using a very simple PCG setup to do this. I'm basically taking landscape patches. They let me flatten it down. I'm finding the volume of that landscape patch in the outer perimeter, and I'm doing a difference of those two. And that gives me the ability to basically get the border of my base, right? Every time I start my level, I could run a random seed, rescatter my buildings. I'm going to get a new base drawn with a new flat area for my character to run around with a new border that's defined. And because it's done with PCG, it just works, right? So if I was to grab, I don't know, something like, here, we'll grab this building over here, and I start moving it around, you're going to see it's going to go through. PCG rebuilds the flat spots, or the landscape patch plugin rebuilds the flat spots. PCG uses that as a reference, and then it builds out off of that. And if I hold down my Alt key, actually, because I have the gizmos on, Alt does not work. If I duplicate that and slide it across, add another building in there, it just goes through, it just works. Very, very powerful feature. If you want to see the graph, come over to the pod and I can walk you through that a bit more in detail. So the final thing that I'm going to mention is audio. We're doing really cool things with audio inside of Unreal Engine, and we have been for releases. In 5.4, we have a great new tool called the Audio Insights tool, which lets you get a nice view of exactly what's happening with all the different audio clips in your scene. In my scene, I've got meta sounds kind of giving me the snow footprints. I've got some cool ambient sounds around my environment. I'm using soundscapes inside the hangar, which we're going to see in just a second. And I'm also going to use a C-bar to turn on the visualization of those audio cues as they happen and I run around my scene. So if I run my character, around my environment here, you can see every little footprint that drops down. I get that little visualization that happens. We jump into the hangar, enter the trigger volume, triggers a meta sound. I come over here, I look at this computer. That guy's playing the sound. That's the actual background sound of City Sample, all made in meta sounds using, and I basically just grab that in there. And then you can see just randomly little things dropping around here in my environment. Those are like little drips and things like that. That's all using soundscapes. And of course, all the information is being displayed in that Audio Insights tool. So it gives you the ability to get information about what's happening and work with it at a very high level. That's basically it. All right, thanks for your time, all. If you want more, come over to the pods. We'll be there. Cheers.